So within this setting, not only do we have this big, massive city, but we also have gate towns, which they're connected to Sigil, and they are part of Planescape, but they also are very representative of kind of a particular plane of existence.
So the gate towns they're in the Outlands. So Sigil is at the top of the spire at the center of the Outlands. So there's a bit of a debate whether or not Sigil is actually in the Outlands,
right, or
if it's beyond it in a place of its own. There's evidence to suggest both, as all good things in Planescape. There are 16 gate towns. They get their name gate towns because they are each constructed around this planar gate to one of the outer planes. Of course, they might have other portals in them, some leading to Sigil and other places, but these gates bring these magical properties. We have this idea that being in close proximity to somewhere that is bordering the nine hells, for example, brings the energy of that plane, some of the philosophies of that plane, and kind of roots this sort of abstract thing at times to a physical place. So each of the outer planes are detailed in the Dungeon Master's Guide. They're kind of these endless dimensions that are at the extremes of alignment. You have, limbo that is constantly changing. If you go to limbo, you might walk on a piece of wood that suddenly turns into stone, and before you realize it, it is chlorine gas that is about to explode. It's kind of hard to adventure there as a low-level character.
Yeah.
Luckily, you can go to the gate town, Zeos, which borders limbo. It's still going to have a piece of limbo. You get the taste of the outer plane without having to do all of it, essentially. So you won't find the 9 layers of the 9 hells in the gate town of Ribcage, but you will find the philosophies of archdevils. You will find a fair number of devils. It will probably be hot most days. And then you get some exciting things that can only happen at that border. So the cool thing too is they're all at the center, or they're these spokes along the wheel of the cosmos, and in that way they are ringing the Outlands. You can actually go from town to town if you want. You can start at the top and go all the way around and visit each one of them.
One of my favorite, there's a Mechanist town.
Yes.
There are Modrons.
Yes.
Tell me about this.
Yes, there are a lot of Modrons. So as you can imagine, Mechanist is extremely orderly. It is a well-oiled machine. It is run by Modrons and representatives from Mechanist or outside, but it is a bureaucratic nightmare. If you've ever stood in line at the DMV, you can have that experience turned up to an 11 in Automata, but you also get all of the other things that are fun with that too. It's not just standing in lines. You can imagine this is a place where most of the buildings look alike, where if you visited a city that uses gridded streets and numbers, this is that way. The town, the gate to Mechanist has this kind of metronome's tick to it. And as you step into Automata, you notice that everything feels synchronized to that beat. If someone is hammering a nail and building something, you'll find that it is matching the march of a Modron walking by, maybe the flap of a bird gliding high above. It's kind of horrifying when you think it's kind of creepy. And that's the way a lot of the gate towns are like that. It's really neat at first, and then you're like, how can anybody live here?
Right.
And that's hopefully what other characters will think. There's also a train station. So if you remember the Concordant Express from Keys from the Golden Vault, there is a terminus to that station that comes out of the gate to Mechanist, and there is also a sort of opposite town called the Inverse underneath, because there's this principle that if essentially this town becomes too orderly, it is cosmically realigned. It is drawn into the gate. It becomes a piece of Mechanist itself, and that plane gets a little bit bigger, and then the town must kind of start anew. So things that are not orderly that are in Mechanist kind of keep it rooted in the Outlands. So there's this whole other town underneath that's literally upside down, called the Inverse. And if you have a wonderful lawful court that is everything to the letter of the law in Automata, in the Inverse you have this kind of anarchic, farcical kangaroo court underneath, kind of keeping it here.
How many of these towns are in the book?
So there are 16 towns in the book. This is probably my favorite thing about the book, because in a lot of instances, these towns weren't explored a lot in Planescape's original debut. A lot of them got maybe a page or two. Now some were detailed further in adventures like the Great Modron March. But a few of them, there's a little bit of a fresh take. For example, the gate town of Faunel, that goes to the Beastlands. In this book, you'll see that it has actually gone through cosmic realignment. So you have this gate town that's essentially starting over. And the town has different factions of these awakened animals that are trying to each rise to the top of the food chain. And the characters might end up embroiled in that conflict.
What stands out to me with Planescape and Sigil as well, and obviously the gate towns, is that you could kind of fit any genre that you want. I like the eclectic, kind of quirky, like you mentioned, like after work vibe that Planescape has. Like you kind of see how the sausage, either you're seeing how the sausage gets made, or you're seeing everyone in their downtime finally. Yeah. All the people in charge of the multiverse. But there is a sense that, like, if you want a gothic horror story, you could shove it into Sigil easily. There's enough space. Yeah. If you wanted a detective story that was around, like, hunting down a rogue Modron or something, you could fit that in there too. Yeah. I feel like you could base a campaign of your liking in this setting or one of these gate towns.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it really is a little bit of everything. The gate towns too have their own kind of philosophies. They're predisposed to, some of them will tell certain flavors of story better than others. For example, Excelsior, the town that borders Mount Celestia. There's kind of an idea that, what is it like if you live on the border of only good and only perfection? But everything else is going to look pretty comparatively worse. You might not want to leave. You also have, if people are always devoted to perfection, and always trying to look out for their neighbors, maybe they're a little nosy. Maybe you get some intrigue, some kind of, like neighbors watching each other, reporting each other sort of vibes, in addition to kind of the campaigns that you would think about for, dealing with angels and stuff. The same is true of, it's not just always Mount Celestia. For example, in the gate town of Fortitude, which is connected to the peaceable kingdoms of Arcadia. This is a plane where everything is orderly, kind of like you'd see in Mechanus, but it's orderly with the sprinkling of good in there. So it's kind of like you take Mount Celestia and Mechanus and combine them. And then this is the town that borders those things. So the people are obsessed with perfection and appearances and looking a certain way. You could imagine that, this is a place where people's outfits have to be perfect, where the poor person that has to do the hedges every morning needs every blade of grass to be the same length. What happens when that order is disrupted? What happens when the characters who are not perfect come into that environment? And how does that environment affect the people and the way they interact with each other? I think those are all really interesting stories that you can really explore in just that one gate town. And there are 15 others. So there's a lot to have at your disposal.